and welcome to Sophie & Co. I'm Sophie Shepard-Natze. A historic deal between the U.S. and 11 Pacific Rim nations has been reached. If passed, it will affect 40% of the world's economy. The TransPacific Partnership now faces months of scrutiny, but remains a secret to the public. Why the mystery? Who really benefits from this agreement? Well, we're joined today by American Congressman, senior member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Sherman is here with me to discuss all of this.
The newly brokered Trans-Pacific Partnership may cost the United States thousands of jobs, while the corporations behind the deal insist on keeping its conditions secret. Will financial heavyweights manage to push the deal through Congress? Are politicians in America becoming their sponsors' clients? And can big money's influence really be countered?
American Congressman, senior member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Sherman, welcome to the show. It's great to have you with us. Now, Congressman, President Obama says the Trans-Pacific Partnership reflects American values and will greatly benefit U.S. workers. If it is really so, and if it's so beneficial, why keep the details of the agreement secret when it's been finalized? What does he have to hide?
Well, that's just one of the many questions. We've, in the United States, have had a phenomenally bad trade policy for the last 30 years. We have gone with this, quote, free trade model, which is really not free trade. We have tried to impose that model everywhere else in the world, and we have run up the largest trade deficit in America's history. In the history of the world, in fact. And if we could just reduce by half, maybe even just reduce by a third, the trade deficit America faces, we would have a labor shortage or a job surplus, if you will, and we'd have rapidly rising wages. This policy on trade is a real disconnect between the elites of America and the average American.
So like you've said, you've had this bad trade policy all along. There was NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, and the CAFTA, the Central American Free Trade Agreement, and both agreements cost American workers hundreds of thousands of jobs. Why is America repeating the same mistake here?
Well, there are a couple of reasons. First, these trade agreements are very much in the interest of Wall Street and the powers in the society. Second, a lot of students want the professors to think they're smart. And a lot of professors live in a professorial world where they can design theoretical models. And, frankly, if we lived in one of these theoretical model universes, I'd support these free trade deals. The fact is, they don't work in practice. And the reason they don't is that while the United States is very much a rule of law, capitalist competition society, most other societies in the world are considerably less so. Perhaps if we had a free trade agreement with Canada, as we did and still do, or Britain, that it would work out to our advantage. But the idea that we're going to get free access to the Vietnamese market is absurd. They don't have freedom and they don't have markets.
So, Congressman, I want to play devil's advocate here a bit. The Trans-Pacific Trade Agreement will help American exports. It will apparently remove thousands of tariffs on U.S. goods. Isn't that beneficial for small businesses and citizens ultimately?
It will help our exports a little bit and increase imports by a lot more. And the reason for that is the only barrier to exporting to the United States is our tariffs. And so we eliminate those. Whereas other countries have tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers. So they reduce or eliminate their tariffs and they keep their non-tariff barriers. That's why the United States, with this trade policy, has been able to go from the largest net exporter in the world to the largest net importer in the history of the world.
Now, you've called the TPP not only a bad economic policy, but a bad geopolitical policy as well. Why is that? I mean, surely the U.S. needs to be on good terms with such a rapidly developing region like Asia.
Well, it's being sold as kind of a China containment policy because, frankly, the economics are so bad that they can always shift and tell people, well, it may be bad for your family, but it's good for American security. The fact is, China benefits from this deal in two very important ways. First, it establishes the principle that currency manipulation is allowed. That is a device America does not use. It's the number one device China does use. And while China is not a party to this agreement, it enshrines their approach to trade. Second, there's a thing called rules of origin. You would think, okay, we're going to have imports from Japan or imports from Vietnam. What about goods that are 60, 70, 80% made in China? Well, they can go to Vietnam, they can get a made in Vietnam sticker put on them and be shipped into the United States tariff-free. So China gets tremendous additional access to the United States market. And of course, since China isn't a party, they do nothing to reduce their barriers to American exports. They won't show us the rules of origin provisions, which define whether the good has to be 60% or 70% or only 50% made in one of the 12 countries. But whatever those rules are, they won't tell us. But the stated rule is going to be different from the de facto rule. So you may have a rule that says, well, you got to certify that this good is at least 60% made in Vietnam. But who will enforce that? How do you tell the difference between goods that are 60% made in Vietnam and those that are 28% made in Vietnam? The companies involved are not going to tell you. And so whatever the rules of origin are, de jure are going to be very different from what they are de facto.
Now, China is not a member of TPP, and when promoting the deal, Obama stated, we can't let China write the rules. We should write the rules. China is competing with the United States as the world's leading economy. Can America really hope to go into Asia Pacific and ignore China?
Oh, I wouldn't ignore China for a second. But the idea that we're going to sacrifice American jobs on the altar of we're writing the rules. No, the representatives of working men and women are not writing the rules. Most of the rules are written on Wall Street, and then the single rule that is most important to China is written in Beijing. So there's a lot in it for Wall Street, there's a lot in it for China, and there's nothing in it on a net basis for workers in the United States.
Now, you go as far as to say that this agreement can undermine U.S. sovereignty. How so, and why would American leaders push for something like that and call it historic?
Well, corporations have an awful lot of power here in the United States, and they don't like it when the government of any country tries to control their behavior. And so they're looking for multinational commitments that would give them a way around national governments. And the investor state provisions are designed to allow companies to say, well, we don't have to comply with this law or that law because an international tribunal says it's bad for investment and bad for trade. The one exception that they did get in this is that a tobacco company trying to avoid health and safety regulations will not be able to use this, which of course exposes the fact that every other company trying to use this system to avoid health and safety regulations is certainly allowed to do so.
But from what I understand, corporations have the right or the ability to sue governments under the TPP. So let's say a government bans Exxon from drilling, right? Then Exxon can then take that government to court. And if they win, then they get exactly what they want. Isn't that right? Will this power start affecting public policy, basically?
Well, it's not clear that they get what they wanted, which was to drill in this particular location or to engage in this particular activity that hurts the environment. Most of these deals provide that if they don't get what they want, they get a big check from the national government. But of course, once you write one or two of those checks, the message gets down to local environmental regulators to make sure not to do anything that a multinational corporation can recover funds from the United States government. So whether it's a check or whether it is unchecked power, the multinationals get an awful lot out of what they want under this deal.
Now, here's another thing. These provisions for the legal protection of corporations against countries have been a common part of trade agreement for over 50 years. Why are they raising so much controversy now?
I think it's because the provisions are getting stronger and the ability of corporations to make use of them is getting more clever and more nuanced. And so we see more lawsuits by corporations using these provisions. And of course, this deal creates more investor-state lawsuit protection than all the other trade agreements that the United States is part of.
Now, the deal faces months of scrutiny in Congress, and you're obviously planning to vote against, but is there a realistic chance of it passing?
In all likelihood, it will pass. I think it will have very solid Republican support, not complete, and we did lose quite a almost 40 votes, or roughly 40 votes, in the vote a few months ago. So this is an uphill battle, just as the last bill was an uphill battle. And frankly, we need some additional allies. Maybe.
Do you feel pressure from your colleagues for the bill to pass?
Not from my colleagues. Most Democrats will be voting against the bill, against TPP. Nancy Pelosi was not from the beginning against Trade Promotion Authority, but she eventually voted against it. And I would suspect that there'll be very little pressure. The president will do everything he can, but and around the edges we'll see. His target list are the 40 Democrats who voted for Trade Promotion Authority, which gave him the authority to sign this agreement and gave him the authority to submit it to Congress for an up or down vote without amendment. It's very rare that you get to submit a bill under those favorable rules.
Is there a lobby for the TPP? When I said colleagues, I really meant, are you pressured by the lobbyists?
Well, this will be lobbied on both sides. And my hope is that there'll be one or two business interests who feel that they weren't treated fairly in the agreement that may give us a few allies that we haven't had before. So, but the lobbying will be from labor organizations on one side and almost all of Wall Street, almost the entire business community on the other side. Not to mention a president who regards this as a legacy. Keep in mind that all of the respectable, the weight of authority in the elites of the society, colored in part because the elites benefit, colored in part because elites like to take their cue from professors with academic models. All of that is pushing the president into thinking that this is a good deal for American workers.
Which side do you think is stronger, the one that's pro or the one that's con?
Well, in the White House, the pro forces will prevail. In the Senate, the pro forces will prevail. The House of Representatives, the last part of the decision-making process, I would say they're ahead of us, but we might catch up. As I'm sure you're aware, the House of Representatives is in some turmoil today, making it even more difficult to predict. But it's going to be difficult to stop this deal.
Congressman, we're going to take a short break right now. When we come back, we'll continue talking to American Congressman Brett Sherman, and we'll discuss the power of big business in politics. Stay with us.
Air support will be carried out without participating in ground operations.
Люди залезли в цивилизацию и думают, все, огородились от природы. По своей привычке немцы много не разговаривают, так и не кричат ни о чем. Если уж земля продырявилась, значит, ему это суждено было. А кричать начнешь, привлечешь посторонних людей.
Видите, как расширяется жерло воронки. Уже можно говорить, что это озеро.
Я спрашиваю, какой он был? Хозяин этого озера. Она говорит, очень страшный.
I want to talk about double standards.
Double standard that there is in Washington.
Russia is responsible for fueling this war.
Assad's war against his own people helped to fuel the rise of ISIL.
By standing up for our values around the world, that is the way that we will keep our own people safe.
How do you get away with such blatant double standards?
We occasionally have to twist the arms of countries that wouldn't do what we need them to do.
There you have it. Simple.
Getting down to business, Russia's words match its actions. There is growing evidence terrorist groups in Syria have taken a real battering from Russia's air power. The West, particularly the United States, remains at a loss how to react. In the meantime, Russia creates political facts on the ground.
We're back with Brett Sherman, American Congressman, a senior member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, discussing how much power corporations have over political decisions. Congressman, you've introduced a bill that would break up too big to fail banks as they pose a threat to U.S. economic security. Do you really believe you can push something like that through Congress?
No. Bernie Sanders introduced it in the Senate. I introduced it in the House. I've got 2 or 3 co-sponsors in the House. Bernie does not have any in the Senate. It is a statement of where we stand, not an attempt to immediately adopt a statute. Perhaps longer term, we would have some success, but the chances of that bill passing in the foreseeable future is beyond small.
So talking about Bernie, why is becoming president so expensive in the U.S.? I mean, why does Hillary Clinton need $1 billion for a campaign?
Every campaign can figure out a way to spend every dollar they can get their hands on. I've been involved in a lot of campaigns where people say, well, if you raise, you only need this amount, and we raised more, and we found effective ways to spend it. What we need is a system in which small donors play an important role, and we ought to have a system where every American is given $25 or $50 a cycle that they can donate to the elected officials of their choice. And we also need to prevent this secret money, this unlimited money that has been allowed into our politics as a result of the Supreme Court decision in Citizens United. That's why I've joined with others in introducing a constitutional amendment. We believe in free speech, but the Supreme Court has gone kind of nuts and said that means billionaires can control our elections.
Well, that's the idea everywhere gets overseas. About big corporations as well. I mean, presidential campaign sponsors include Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Citigroup. If they're bankrolling the show, does it mean they're running it as well?
As a technical matter, the main campaign for anybody running for federal office can take funds only from individuals or organizations where they get voluntary contributions under strict limits from individuals. The problem is the Supreme Court has opened things up to these second campaigns. It's absolutely absurd. But in many of the presidential races, the candidate controls way less than half of his or her campaign. And a group of people that the candidate isn't allowed to talk to are running their TV commercials, running the main part of their campaign while collecting money from often undisclosed sources to run those campaigns. The only thing, I can't think of a system that is worse than what we have now, where not only do you have huge quantities of money, and often it's kept secret, but the candidate can play this game of not taking responsibility for what their main campaign is actually saying.
So are you saying, for instance, Hillary Clinton is not controlling half of her campaign?
More than half the money that will be spent, and I haven't charted exactly when the expenditures are made, but when those big expensive TV campaigns start, most of the commercials favoring Hillary Clinton or favoring Jeb Bush or opposing their opponents will be paid for by these, quote, independent expenditure committees, which are allowed to raise unlimited amounts of money. Often they're structured so they don't have to disclose where that money comes from. They're allowed to take money directly from corporations. The one rule is they're not supposed to talk to the candidate about how they're going to spend it, which sometimes stretches credulity, but creates this bizarre circumstance where you could have the most watched Hillary Clinton commercial be one that contains material that she doesn't like.
In the last Romney-Obama presidential contest, Wall Street was giving money to both candidates. Is this tactic for insurance to make sure they influence the winner, whomever that may be? So does it matter which candidate even wins?
Not every contribution from somebody who works at Goldman Sachs is part of a well-defined, efficient campaign for Goldman Sachs to have political power. In fact, you have a lot of rich individuals there. They have strong views on foreign policy. They have strong views on a woman's right to choose or gun control or this or that. They happen to be wealthy, and with Goldman Sachs, they usually support Goldman Sachs's positions on banking and taxation issues, but they're involved in the campaign for other reasons. But obviously, it gives those with money, whether their first goal of spending that money is to protect Goldman Sachs's financial interest, or their first goal is to promote gun control. People who write really large checks have some influence not only on their first goal, but also on their second goal.
So basically, does that mean that both candidates will end up doing what their sponsors want, no matter who wins, Democrat or Republican?
It's not just money. The purpose of money is to get votes. And the more sophisticated the voters, the more effort they put into making their decision, the more the voters control what the politicians do, and the money controls less. But it's clear that if you have two American citizens and one spends $5 million giving money to politicians and one doesn't, the first one has way more influence on our policy, and that's not the way democracy is supposed to work.
So if a man like Bernie Sanders, for instance, proposes reining in the rich corporations, obviously they won't give him the money. I like the man. I worry about the man. Does that mean that he doesn't stand a chance of being elected?
Well, I think he stands some chance. Bernie and I have known each other for a long time, since our days together in the House of Representatives. But I think he faces a number of issues. He describes himself as a democratic socialist. This country doesn't naturally, the average voter doesn't identify themselves as democratic socialists. In fact, socialism is a dirty word among a big chunk of the electorate. So I think Bernie faces a number of issues, but you wouldn't expect him to be getting a lot of Goldman Sachs money. That being said, the fact that he's taken the strong position that he has, and that I have too, to break up the banks that are too big to fail, have motivated an awful lot of small contributions. And the technology is in the direction of democracy. Technology has meant small contributions can be raised. Back, I'm pretty old, I've been doing this for a while. A decade and a half ago, small contributions were raised with postal mail, and it would cost $20 of postal costs and printing in order to raise $22 in small contributions. Now, so much of that is online, you're raising the same $22, but it's costing you 22 cents. So small contributions are playing a bigger role. And then secondly, online, it used to be that if you didn't own a newspaper, if you didn't control a TV station or buy an awful lot of time, that you couldn't influence voters. Now, anybody with a blog can get their message through to some folks. So technology is pulling in one way. The Supreme Court decision, unfortunately, pulls very hard in the other direction.
Well, I wonder if technology is making American presidential campaign this time around, showing that people are backing some very unusual candidates, like Donald Trump is an obvious example. But then, again, there's Bernie Sanders, who, as you say, doesn't shy away from being called a socialist, and he still attracts supporters. What's changing in the U.S. political scene? Is the traditional two-party contest showing signs of decline?
Well, the parties as structures have remained. We probably won't face a major third-party candidate the way we did in 1992 with Ross Perot. But instead of those structures being owned by the insiders, we see people way outside the mainstream of those parties, way outside the social mainstream of those parties, vying effectively. And they are because Americans are angry. When I was growing up, we were told every generation is going to live better than the generation before them. That stopped in the 1980s, and we've noticed. And we see economic growth higher in many places in the United States, and we'd like to see economic growth here, not only in terms of a top-line GDP number, but in terms of median family incomes. Americans haven't had a raise for 20 or 30 years. It's about time we got one.
Congressman, it's been a pleasure.
When I say we, I mean the average working people. Congress members are doing fine.
It was a pleasure talking to you, Congressman. Thanks a lot for this interview. We were talking with American Congressman, senior member of House Foreign Affairs Committee, Sherman, discussing what the TransPacific Partnership Agreement is, how big business benefits from the deal, and who rules the show in U.S. politics. That's it for this edition of Sophie & Co. I'll see you next time.